Okay, so it turns out that melatonin is only produced when it is dark. Okay, so how does that work? So if we zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that sunlight actually inhibits the melatonin pathway, okay? And night stimulates the melatonin pathway. So this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but what you can take away from it is that when there's light, you do not have melatonin. But when you don't have light, you do have melatonin. So what happens is when you have daylight, you have inhibition of this pathway that produces melatonin here. And as the sun sets, you get a disinhibition of this pathway, right? So you get less inhibition, and eventually you get the production of melatonin during the night. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes? Oh, that's a really, so you said, is it just sunlight or could it be any kind of light? Yeah, so that's a very good question, and we will get to that in a second. So nice work. Okay, so photic information from either the sun or from the lack of sun will reach your sensory receptors, will hit the sensory cells, so the nervous tunic of your eye, and this will have photoreceptors in the retina. So think about what the work that you've done, and what are two photoreceptive cells that you already know of in your retina? Okay. I'm hearing rods and cones. Is that generally right? Okay. So your rods look like rods, your cones look like cones. They tend to be associated with color vision, and rods tend to be associated with detecting, being very good at visualizing low light situations. But in any case, both rods and cones are very, very good at generating images, okay? So they take what's around you and they convert it into a visual image of all of the spatial surroundings in your environment, okay? So if you have been told that there are two photoreceptors in your retina, you have been lied to, because in fact there is an additional photoreceptor that we have just found, and it's called the photoreceptive retinal ganglion cell, the PRGCs, okay? And these are located right here, okay? So this is this blue neuron that I've circled here, okay? And what this does is it doesn't actually generate any particular image of what you're seeing, okay? But it is capable of detecting just light, okay? And the kind of light that it's best tuned to, the kind of light that it picks up the best, is blue light, okay? So it's blue light in the wavelengths of 450 to 480 nanometers. So these are very short wavelength regions of light, if that makes sense. Yes. Okay. And the way it does this is through the pigment melanopsin. So in rods, you have rhodopsin. In these particular cells, you have the pigment melanopsin that helps you detect blue light. Okay. So here's the million-dollar question then. So if a person is blind, if they cannot form images from the cells in their retina, are they still able to carry out circadian cycles? Do they still have a circadian cycle? So take a minute and talk to your partner, and then I'll see what you've come up with. Any thoughts over here?
What's up?
Any thoughts over here?
I would say yes, just because like even when your eyes are closed, you can still sense when light is there. And
Yeah.
I assume that those photoreceptors or photosensitive cells might be independent of whether or not there's a neural connection between your brain and your
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. So even if you can't make images, right, from the cells and the rods, so if you've gotten rid of all, you have no cells and rods at all, right, as long as your PRGC cells are still intact, then you should still be able to detect this blue light that's going on. They're located just behind it. So you see this bipolar cells that connect the, so they're horizontal cells that connect all of the cones and rods together horizontally, right? So you have lateral inhibition and that sort of thing. But you have bipolar cells that also then connect to the RGC cells. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so if you've had a second to talk about it, let's take a look and see what you have decided. So Leslie Rinkin. Is Leslie Rinkin around? Where? Oh yeah, perfect. All right, so what did you decide? Can blind people have circadian rhythms? Besides the specific? Yeah. So you're saying that you can potentially still detect melatonin if there are other parts in your body that are able to detect melatonin. That is a really good answer. There are some organisms, in fact, that have melatonin detecting, or not melatonin detecting cells, but light detecting cells in other parts of their body. Unfortunately, this does not happen in mammals. So, are there any other possibilities that you've come up with? Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of depends on where the source of the blindness is.
Yes.
Like if your blindness is of the variety where just rods and cones, or your retina, or any other part of the actual eyeball itself is damaged, yeah. But if it's neuronal, there could be. It depends on where the failure point was.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what we're looking for. So if you have no cones and no rods at all, you're not able to generate any image of your external environment. So you're completely blind. You won't be able to see anything, but as long as your PRGC cells are still intact, these guys way over here, as long as these are still intact, you can still see light, and you can still see light in those wavelengths that I told you about, those short wavelength lights, okay? And so that can actually entrain your circadian rhythm. So even if you're blind and those cells are intact, you can still have circadian rhythms. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. What if they're What if you're totally, so if somebody scoops out your eye and you have none of those cells, then you don't have circadian rhythms. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, great. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Yeah, see if I can make it work. Yeah, okay, so you'll have to use the WHO if you want to text, or respond to poll everywhere with the WHO. So go ahead and try that. Okay, so poll's closing in about 5, so make your decisions. 5 more seconds? 5 more seconds? We're good? We're all good? Everyone's gotten in? Okay, so I'm going to close the polls. Boop. Okay, let's see what you thought. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So blue light, all right, I think we all came to a consensus that blue light is what we're looking for. So red light tends to be a very long wavelength, right? So I'm glad you all converged on blue light. And now the question is, well, what does blue light do? Does it actually inhibit the production of melatonin, or does it increase the production of melatonin? Does anyone from the first answer, from the inhibition of melatonin, want to defend their answer? Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if you remember that, that slide with the sun and the moon, okay? So the general way to think about it is if you see light, that shuts off melatonin. Okay, it's a little bit simplified, but if you see light, it shuts off melatonin. If you see dark, you can assume that melatonin will then increase. Okay? All right, were there any compelling reasons for increase in, other than you were slightly confused? Okay, have we clarified that a little bit? Do you understand this more? Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the pineal gland and how that produces melatonin. Okay, so the pineal gland is so named because it looks kind of like a pine cone, all right? And individual cells of the pineal gland are referred to as the pinealocyte, okay? So let's take a look and see if we can track the pathway again. So photic information enters through the retina, your sensory organs. They hit the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN. So again, that's the master pacemaker or the master clock of your body. These go through the spinal cord, blah, 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 comes back up. And then what you end up with is a sympathetic neuron that synapses onto the pineal site. So what happens at the sympathetic neuron junction is that it releases a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. Okay? And this norepinephrine then binds to beta-adrenergic receptors that are embedded in the membrane of the pinealocyte. And once you get binding onto the beta-adrenergic receptor, you initiate a second messenger cascade. So basically, this is just the molecular pathway that helps you convert tryptophan, right? So this is an amino acid, right? And that converts through an enzymatic pathway into serotonin. That's another neurotransmitter. And that goes all the way down into melatonin. Okay, so once you've made melatonin, that is what gets punted out into your bloodstream and circulates. All right? So then the question is, well, if this is the pathway, then what happens if input from the sympathetic nervous system is cut? Okay, so if you lose sympathetic innervation, what happens to melatonin production? Okay, take a second, talk to your partners, and then I'll see what you think about this.